Welcome to my channel. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. It started out like any other night, really. I was putting my son, Tong, to bed. Tong's a good kid, did his homework, didn't complain about vegetables, even cleaned his room without me having to ask him twice. I mean, how many dads get that lucky? Anyway, I was tucking him in, making sure he was all snug under the blankets, and he just looked up at me with those big eyes of his, the ones that made him look even younger than he was. He was 6, but sometimes he seemed a lot older, you know? So I was about to stand up and head to my own room when he grabbed my hand, real tight, and he said, "Daddy, there's someone under my bed." Now, kids say stuff like that, right? The whole monster under the bed thing? I'd heard it a million times, so I didn't think much of it. I gave him a smile, one of those dad smiles that's supposed to be reassuring, and I said, "Hey buddy, there's no one under there. It's just your imagination." I even did a little peek down at the floor to show him everything was fine, but he just shook his head and his grip on my hand got tighter. "There's someone under my bed, Daddy," he repeated, this time with a little tremble in his voice. All right. Now he had my attention. I figured it was late and he was probably just having one of those moments, like he was in that space between awake and asleep. You know what I mean? Kids get weird ideas when they're sleepy. But I figured, all right, let's just humor him. So I knelt down, kind of making it all theatrical, saying, "All right, let's see who's hiding under here." As I bent down to look, I was half smiling, not expecting anything, but then I saw him. I saw Tong under the bed. He was lying there wide-eyed, staring right back at me with this terrified expression. And I'll tell you right now, I'd never felt my heart drop so fast. It was like the air just got sucked out of the room. He was lying under the bed, and he whispered to me, "Daddy, there's someone on my bed." I don't know how to explain the feeling that hit me at the moment. It was like reality just folded in on itself. There was Tong on the bed, and then there was Tong under the bed, both of them looking at me, both scared out of their minds. My brain just couldn't make sense of it. I stood up slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady, but I'm telling you, it wasn't easy. I looked down at the Tong on the bed, and he was sitting there, blinking at me, like he didn't know what just happened. Then I looked back down, just to make sure I wasn't seeing things, and he was still under the bed, whispering, "Daddy, there's someone on my bed." I felt this cold sweat start to trickle down my back. My hands were shaking, but I managed to pull it together enough to reach down under the bed and grab him, the Tong that was under there. As soon as I touched him, he felt real. His hand was cold and trembling, and he clung to me like he was holding on for dear life. I pulled him out from under the bed, and he was sobbing, clutching onto my shirt with those tiny hands, his face buried in my shoulder. Now I was sitting there with my son in my arms, and I looked up at the bed, and it was empty. The Tong that had been sitting there just a second ago was gone. Just like that. At this point, I didn't know what to do. I was sitting on the floor, holding him, trying to calm him down, but I was shaking almost as much as he was. I told him it was going to be okay, even though I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. But after a few minutes, he started to relax a little. His breathing went back to normal, and he looked up at me. "Did you see him, Daddy?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. I saw something, Tong," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "But it's gone now, you're safe. I'm here." I didn't know if I was saying that for him or for me. Either way, it didn't make me feel any better. After a while, he finally calmed down enough that I could tuck him back into bed. I stayed with him until he fell asleep, and even then, I couldn't bring myself to leave. I decided to stay in his room all night. I just sat there with the light on, watching over him, my mind spinning in 1,000 different directions. What did I see? Did I imagine it? Was it some kind of weird trick of the light? That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that terrified look on Tong's face, both of their faces. It felt so real, and yet, by morning, I was almost ready to believe it had been a bad dream. The next night, though, things got even stranger. I put Tong to bed like usual, and I was about to leave when he grabbed my hand again. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with the same fear from the night before. "Daddy, there's someone in the closet," he whispered. Now, I'll be honest, my heart skipped a beat when he said that. But I was his dad, you know? It was my job to protect him, to make him feel safe. So I gave him a reassuring smile and said, "All right, let's go see who's hiding in the closet." I walked over to the closet, opened the door, and it was empty. I turned back to him and said, "See?" Nothing there. But he just stared at me, and his face went pale. "Daddy," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "look again." I turned back to the closet, and that's when I saw it. There was a figure standing in the back of the closet, just barely visible in the darkness. It was tall, too tall to be Tong or anyone else I knew, and it was just standing there watching me. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unblinking. I slammed the closet door shut and grabbed Tong, pulling him close. I don't know what I saw, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I scooped him up and got out of that room fast. My heart was pounding like it was trying to break free of my chest, but I kept it together long enough to get him out of the house. I didn't even know where I was going at first, but then I realized that there was only one place I wanted to go, my parents' house. We drove over there in silence. Tong was quiet in the back seat, but he didn't let go of my hand once, even after I parked and brought him inside. My parents looked at me like I was crazy when I showed up so late, but they didn't ask questions. They saw how rattled I was and just took us in. The next morning, I told them what happened. I didn't know how else to say it except just to tell them exactly what I'd seen. I expected them to laugh, maybe tell me I was dreaming, but they didn't. My mom just looked at my dad, and he nodded, like they knew something I didn't. "We'll go check it out," my dad said after a while. "You stay here with Tong." I was in no state to argue. Whatever they planned to do, they didn't need me there for it. So I stayed with Tong at their house while they went back to mine. They were gone for a few hours, and I didn't dare call to see what was going on. I just sat there with Tong, trying to keep him calm, though I probably looked like I needed comforting more than he did. When they came back, my dad just gave me a reassuring nod and said, "It should be all right now." He didn't explain what they did, and honestly, I didn't ask. I was just relieved to hear it might be over. Even so, I didn't rush back. I ended up staying with my parents for a week just to be sure. I couldn't get rid of the feeling of that night out of my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see Tong's face, both of them, staring at me. When we finally went back, the house was peaceful, quiet, like nothing had ever happened. Tong went back to his normal, happy self, and he didn't seem to remember any of it. I'd tuck him in every night, but he never said anything about anyone being under the bed, or in the closet, or anywhere else. It was like it had never happened. Even though things went back to normal every now and then, I can't help but wonder. I'll be walking past his room at night, just doing a quick check, and I'll catch myself glancing under the bed or at the closet, half expecting to see something staring back. But every time, there's nothing. Just an empty room, a quiet house. Whatever my parents did, it seems to have worked. But I'll tell you, bedtime hasn't felt the same since that night, and I don't think it ever will. Thank you for listening to this video. I'll see you in the next one.